Thanks to everyone for watching today. Today, we're going to hear from experts about climate change and where climate change and migration meet. And hopefully, we will learn some new things and be inspired to get active. We will also hear from people, including some right here in the city of Houston, who are already facing the fallout of climate change. Today we have with us Iris Gonzalez, who has served as the Coalition Director for the Coalition for Environment, Equity, and Resilience since November 2018. Iris has over 10 years of experience in program development, program management, coalition building, grant making, fundraising, and community engagement. So, as you can see, a vast of knowledge from our sister Iris here today. We also have with us Nicole Hernandez Hammer. Nicole is SEIU, is with SEIU, and is an expert on climate change. We will also be hearing from a member of 32BJ, Paul Jerome, and he will be joining us today as one of the security officers in the county of Broadward. I'm hoping I said that right. And I also have with us Teresa Vasquez, who is a member of SCIU Texas and a union leader. We're also very glad to have with us an activist from CEER, Dolores Mendoza, uh, fighting for homeowners who are impacted by climate change right here in the city of Houston. So, as you can see, we have a vast group of folks who are willing to share their experience with us and really talk about this very important issue. So, let's get started with what we're all here to do today. I want to start with a question for all of you. We are seeing more extreme events from flooding on the coast to the catastrophic fires that we see on the West Coast and the big freeze that we saw right here in Texas, who actually not only made us lose power for a lot of days here, but we also saw people who died as a result of it and who were displaced as a result of it. What is the connection between these events and the climate? And I want to start asking that and the climate change. And then I also want to see how are these events impacting migration. And let's start with you, Nicole.
Yeah, sure. So first, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm excited to be part of this great panel. Um, so we know that climate change is worsening the frequency and or intensity of the kinds of events you've just described. Sea level rise has risen globally by 9 inches since the early 1900s. Since 1991, temperatures have averaged between a degree to a degree and a half higher than they were in the early 1900s over most of the US. And the science is clear that it's a result of greenhouse gas emissions. So when it comes to wildfires, we know that climate change increases the risk of hot and dry weather, the kind of weather that fuels these fires. This year in Western states, we've seen record-breaking temperatures, and that's been coupled with severe droughts. And this has led to a series of major wildfires. In fact, in California, more than twice as many acres of land have been burned this year alone by wildfires compared to the 5-year average in California. And you mentioned the Texas big freeze, which was a result of air in the atmosphere above the Arctic that suddenly warmed and started moving, likely as a result of climate change, causing a weakening of what's called the Polar Vortex, which is like a pocket or a collection of winds that keep cold air in the North Pole. So there's a large and growing body of research in the area of climate change attribution science. And basically what that does is it helps us better understand how climate change is fueling these extreme events that we're experiencing now. So for example, there was a study in 2017 that found that Hurricane Harvey was more powerful because of climate change. In fact, they found that the 7-day total average of rainfall during the storm was 38% higher than it would have been in a similar storm in the 1950s. So when it comes to hurricanes, we know that warming water and sea level rise that results in a climate change allowing for hurricanes to grow these storms rapidly and extend flooding deeper and further inland. And while the number of storms may not change, the intensity of storms is already changing. They're becoming stronger. So storms reaching the strength of storms like Hurricane Matthew, which was a Category 5 in 2016 that devastated Haiti, is something that we're seeing more often. And those countries and communities that contribute to the least, contribute the least to the drivers of climate change, are often the same communities that carry its heaviest burdens. Climate change is kind of considered a push of immigration. So according to the World Bank in 2017, they estimated that approximately 24 million people globally were forced by sudden onset weather events to move. So flooding, forest fires, droughts, and storms. And in 2020, that number rose to 3 million. I'm originally from Guatemala, and a 2021 survey of Guatemalan immigrants like me, conducted by the International Organization of Migration, found that 1 in 5 were fleeing from natural disasters and climate change. So it's these kinds of events that are resulting in displacement that are happening all around the world and are happening more often. And I'll just mention one more thing. There was a study that came out just a couple weeks ago that found that 85% of the global population has already experienced weather events and have been made worse by climate change.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I'm amazed when I hear you speak about the impact and the connection. We now want to bring into the conversation Paul Jerome from 32BJ. And I would tell you, Paul has been impacted by this twice, not only in his home country of Haiti, but now as he's made the U.S. his new home in South Florida, he's also seen the impact of climate change. So let's bring in Paul into the conversation.
Hi everyone, my name is Paul Jerome and I'm from Haiti, and I've been living in the United States for like the past 13 years. And when I was living in Haiti, I experienced many hurricanes that's damaged part of the country. And for example, I had my family, my mom and my dad, like kind of talked to me about David and how David was like damaged part of the country. And myself, I experienced Gordon. We spent like hours or days without powers. But we are a poor country, so big instead of saying to getting like better, so or better understanding, a better way to handle the hurricane. Unfortunately, it's kind of getting worse. Any little like rain, like the most likely the capital kind of flooded. So this is why a lot of Haitian, they leave the country, because after they go through all of this, they can go back to their feet if they have businesses that break down and they lost everything. So that's why they went where else to have a better life. So you can see them like go to Brazil, United States, and even Republic Dominican. So here in the United States, I experienced Matthew. So which on my side, North Miami, we experienced days without power. So I think the climate change affect everyone in many ways. And until now, we feel like every year the hurricane and the weather is kind of we're kind of uncontrolled. So we don't know what we're gonna get later. We don't know how things if is thing gonna be better or worse. So that's why I pledge to everyone to do what they can to help the climate.
That was a powerful video from Paul. Dolores, I know you have been impacted by the repeated flooding in Harris County. Can you share your experience with the Harris County buyout and and navigating, moving from one neighborhood to another due to the extreme weathers here in Texas and specifically in Houston?
Okay. Yeah. So my name's Dolores Mendoza. Thank you guys for having me. My family is being impacted by a mandatory buyout program due to continuous flooding in my area. During Harvey, the waters were so high, you couldn't even see the street signs out in the road. They were completely covered. Some houses were covered over their roofs. We've always had flooding in our area. I've lived here my entire life. We've always had flooding, but we've never seen anything as drastic, as scary as Harvey was. Now, my family's lived in this neighborhood since 1953. We moved in. My kids are the seventh generation living in this neighborhood. In total, there are 13 of my relatives, immediate relatives, that are being, I'd say, displaced, because we are being displaced. We did not want to leave our area. This is our home. We've always lived here. So now we are part of this mandatory buyout program by Harris County in Houston. And they are basically buying our homes to create a retention pond of our neighborhood. And they are moving us all around Harris County, which is a huge, huge area. I think it's the largest county in Texas. So it's a huge area. So now my family, who's used to living on two streets, walking distance from each other, we will now be miles and miles away from each other. So now navigating that process, this is a low income area. There are a lot of retirees, a lot of non-citizens who live here. And we are now having to look for homes and, subdivisions, which we are not used to, higher tax brackets, higher homing fees, HOA fees, things of that nature that people in my area are not used to. And especially fixed income families or non-citizen families who are not used to navigating that process of purchasing a home. I feel fortunate that I'm still young enough to be able to move and enjoy a home, but relatives such as my grandmother and things like that who are in their 80s will not have that luxury. They're being pulled from homes that they lived in their entire lives because of this flooding, and they're going to be moving into somewhere where they don't even know where the nearest grocery store is because they don't drive anymore and things like that. So it's the flooding is definitely, I understand the flooding it's scary. It's happening more often. We get little bits of rain and our streets are flooding, our ditches are flooding. Most of the houses, mine included, are about 10 feet off the ground, elevated 10 feet off the ground because of the floodings, so that we don't continuously have to, redo our floors and take out carpets and things like that because the water comes in. But even that has not been enough. During Harvey, I had water inside of my house, water damage inside of my house because of how high the waters were. So, it's definitely, when I was a kid, flooding was fun. It was knee deep. We were outside playing in it, Now as an adult with children of my own, during Harvey, I had to get my kids rescued by boat to get taken out. So we were stranded here on our porch after all of our kids left, my sisters and I. My brother-in-law ended up breaking the engine, or breaking the basically hot wiring a boat, so that my mom's boat, so that he could get us out of here safely. After hours after our kids were gone and street signs were barely even visible anymore at that point. And he had to go in and pick up, me, my sisters, my brother-in-laws, my cousins, who were all still stuck in here because we used the boat that came in to save us to take our kids out because there was not enough room for everybody. So, that's things like that are happening now in our area. And we understand that the buyout is necessary to move everyone to safety. But also, again, if, because we are a low income area, the county really didn't pay too much attention to our drainage system, to keeping the ditches updated, to extending the bayou, things like that. They just built newer subdivisions in our area. They built a golf course. So now all of that water, they're built at higher elevation. So now all of the water just flows down to us. So now we're being removed from our homes because of that. So it's a big thing.
I'm sure it really is. It just displaces us in so many different ways. It takes people from their own communities and where they feel comfortable. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing around this specific issue, fighting for equitable buyout programs for folks who are being impacted. Thank you so much, Dolores.
Thank you.
I am going to turn now to our next panelist here. I want to take a moment here to say that the inhumane ways that Haitian migrants were treated at our border was un-American and wrong. President Biden must stop using COVID as an excuse to deny migrants the ability to apply for asylum. We must become more and more welcoming country, and the threat of hoping for new life in America with compassion. Um, and now, though, it's very important to hear from our next panelists. I apologize for that. I felt like I had to say that in the moment. Um, Iris, it's from the group, very active here in our area of Houston. We work in partnership with them of CEER, and so I want to bring Iris to say how glad I am that you're here and to share your experience and to ask you how much worse do you think it will get over the time, and how can we build more resilient communities here in our area?
Yeah, thank you so much, Elsa. I really appreciate the chance to be here with you and to co-host this event. And SEER is really proud to have SEIU Texas as a founding member of our collaborative, which now has 28 nonprofit organizations working on policy and advocacy solutions in the greater Houston region. And I also want to thank Dolores for being here and sharing her story. I've heard it several times, and every time I hear something a little bit different. And Dolores, you're just such a powerful speaker, and you're really the face of you and your family and your neighborhood of what's happening here in Houston. So I just want to thank you for being here and for sharing, for lifting up your voice and sharing your story. There's a lot to say. There's a lot to cover in this conversation. Nicole did, I think, a really good job of describing kind of all the things that are impacting us. But I just want to emphasize some of what we see here in Houston and in Texas, which I know is happening across the country and across the world. There, not that long ago, there was a report from the IPCC, a panel of scientists from across the world who have been studying and have been sounding the alarm about climate change for many decades now. Really looking into the future of what this holds and how it will be for us as humans, as people who live on this planet, which is our only one that we call home. And really saying that we're in a code red situation, right? There are effects and impacts that have resulted of the way that we have built our lives, the way that we have built our economy, the way that we power our houses and everything that we do, that are irreversible. We can't do anything to change them, but we still have an opportunity to make a difference. And so we need to act, and we need to act boldly, and we need to act quickly. And in order to do that, it's going to take every single one of us. And so I just want to start by saying that there's a seat at this table for everyone who's listening and anyone who is out there. We need you. We need all of these hands to be doing this work together. Just to emphasize some of what we know will continue to happen here in Houston. There was a climate impact assessment or a study that the city of Houston did to try to understand and look into the future, right? What does it mean to have this warming globe and to have these warming oceans, the warming Gulf of Mexico here in the Gulf South? And we know that our summers are going to continue to get hotter, and where normally it cools off at night when it's dark, we're going to have smaller and smaller windows of the ability for city to cool off at night. And so a lot of people complain about how hot every summer is. And I welcome you to think about, this is the coolest summer maybe that you will ever live, right? The trend is that it will continue to get hotter and hotter. And this is especially dangerous for people who have to work outside, folks who can't afford to run their air conditioning all day, and other people who are vulnerable. As was said, we also know there's going to be more intense hurricanes, not necessarily more of them, but the ones that do come are going to hit us really hard. And we saw that with Harvey, where the hurricane really just lingers and it doesn't move along. It stays and it pours water for days and days and days, and people just don't have a chance to have that water drain off. In addition to the fact that we have not invested properly in our drainage and in elevating homes and all the things that Dolores lifted up. And so what we're really seeing is that folks are stuck in a cycle where they don't ever recover. Recovery is a myth. It's not something that actually happens. It's the same people getting hit by the same things over and over again. And we have to look at that in the history and in a context of historical disinvestment, right? We have failed these people and we have not properly invested in them. And so when neighborhoods and communities like Dolores's are deemed, hopelessly deep in the floodplain and there's no other recourse, there's no other solution, we need to understand that our governments had a really big role in how that happened. It didn't just happen. There are investments that happened around those places. And we see that there's a big inequity in how, here in Harris County, who gets bought out, who gets relocated and displaced, and then who gets a home elevation or a home replacement, right? Even when the numbers don't make sense, even when we have to pay twice what the house is worth, that's happening in higher income neighborhoods, mostly white neighborhoods, and then in communities of color and folks who are on the front lines or on the fence line, they're being bought out. They're being turned into climate migrants and climate refugees. And so we really need to examine and look at our present conditions with that historical lens before we think about what are future looking solutions look like.
Thank you so much for that reflection. I think you just kind of hit what I was going to ask from the panelists, and who did you guys think was the most vulnerable around this issue of climate change? And I think you just mentioned, right? It's like communities of color, communities who are low income, and who are not getting prioritized as we start thinking about the rebuild. But I would say, but here's another question that I have. It's like, what do you guys see sort of happening in the next 10, 20, 30 years? What are our communities doing now to address these issues?
Well, I can talk a little bit about the projections. I can kind of begin to talk about it now. We can maybe go into it a little bit later too, but just to say that we know that there's a certain amount of climate change impacts that are baked into the system. Iris mentioned the IPCC in the last report. And so we know that over the coming years, that these storms are going to happen, that the extreme heat is going to happen, and we need to build resilience that centers frontline and fence line communities. But we also need to realize that we have a small window of time to mitigate climate change, to avoid the worst. And that's why it's also critical as we build resilience to think about supporting legislation at local, state, and federal levels that reduce greenhouse gas emissions as well.
Thank you. Iris, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think, we're talking about, especially in the Gulf South, where Texas and Louisiana share such a big part, a big slice of the pie of where petrochemical facilities are, where oil and gas industry exists, and how all of the greenhouse gases that are emitted. We play a really big role in the Gulf South for the whole nation. And so when you hear President Biden or you hear other folks talking about meeting these goals and taking advantage of that small window of time that Nicole is talking about, and participating at an international scale in meeting these goals, we can't get there if Texas and Louisiana and the Gulf South don't change the course of action that we're on right now. And so there's already communities who are fighting and mobilizing to shut down the expansion of these facilities. There are already people who are working to hold our candidates and our elected leaders accountable to these actions and to these promises that have been made. But we really need to build stronger and deeper networks of people who are organizing around this and who are putting out this vision of what a future could really look like, where we take into account the folks that have been historically overlooked and neglected and left out, and prioritize them, and where we really direct investments to communities that are hit the hardest and hit the worst. And where, even when we know that buyouts and things like that are going to need to happen, that we can center human rights, right? That we can say to a family like the Mendoza family, you have 7 generations of people here. And, we know that immigrants and people of color live in community. We live in a network. And so to relocate you means that we're fracturing that network and that community that you have. And so we can assign a monetary value to that. We can say, you need to get a heritage benefit because of the deep roots that you have here and because of the fact that you're being relocated. And so really thinking about how all of the dollars that we have can really prioritize and live out the values that we want to see. And I'll say one more thing about money is that, we need philanthropy and we need funding. I mentioned how much Texas and Louisiana have this outsized, slice of the pie. They only get about 2% of funding that goes to all of the climate work that's happening across the country. And so there are a lot of funders who are drawing attention to the great work that's already begun in the Gulf South and who are telling other funders like, no, it's not too hard and it's not too late. And it's there is hope and we need to invest in this work. And we're really encouraged by that. But we need those dollars to flow to the groups on the ground that are doing that grassroots power building and that advocacy and putting out this vision of what a different kind of future world looks like.
Well, I just want to add real quickly to underscore what Iris just said so well, is that there's a huge sense of urgency to see those dollars flow. And in terms of the Gulf Coast, as you were mentioning, Iris, within the next 30 years, actually less than 30 years, by 2050, so less than the time it takes to pay off a mortgage, sea level rise is going to increase by a foot. By the end of the century, it could be 4 feet. The number of hot days, so days above 90, right now is about, I think, 60 in the coast of Texas. Mm-hmm. And by 2050, it could be 115 of those days. So we talk about, like the short term and the long term game. We don't have time for a long play on this. This needs to happen quickly.
Yeah, the time is now. I agree with all of you guys. And, I wanted, first of all, let me just say, and I'm going to say it in Spanish, Teresa, qué bueno tenerte aquí. Creo que es importante también escuchar de personas como tú, una inmigrante que vino aquí a buscar trabajo y el impacto que está teniendo, obviamente, los cambios que estamos viendo en el clima aquí en Texas. Really quick for those of you, I'm asking Teresa to join us in the conversation. Just talked a little as an immigrant herself and someone who's working here in the city of Houston, the impact that climate change has had on her. Teresa?
Hola compañeros, pues mi nombre es Teresa Vázquez, soy trabajadora de limpieza y también soy de la Unión y líder. Ya tengo 7 años trabajando para el edificio de la 1001 de la Fanning y es impactante pues escuchar las historias de mis compañeros, ¿verdad? Aquí en Texas también el cambio climático nos ha afectado de manera muy significante y hemos tenido malas experiencias. En mi caso pasé una muy mala experiencia con el huracán Harvey, ya que y con la tormenta invernal, ¿verdad?, del mes de febrero de este año. Me vi en la situación de no poder salir de mi apartamento, ya que todo estaba inundado, el agua nos llegaba hasta la cintura, se perdieron los vehículos, se perdió todo lo de adentro de los apartamentos, todo, porque el agua llegó hasta la estufa, así de alto llegó. Y pues tuvimos que tomar riesgos, ¿verdad?, para salir a buscar alimentos para mis hijos y el agua, ¿verdad? Pues también los ingresos bajaron, pues ya no pudimos ir a trabajar y pues es bien triste porque pues sin trabajo, imagínate, y los biles como quiera no paraban de llegar, ¿verdad? Y también en la tormenta invernal nos quedamos sin electricidad y con el friazo que estaba haciendo pasamos bastante frío en nuestros hogares y en medio de esta pandemia pues es difícil tener que dejar de trabajar, ¿verdad? Como les digo, y los gastos pues siguen corriendo. Y yo creo que es por eso que tenemos que tomar y tenemos que reconocer que estamos en medio de una crisis de cambio climático y tenemos que actuar, porque esto nos está impactando de manera muy fuerte. Esa es mi historia, ese es mi caso, y muchas gracias por escucharme, ¿verdad?
So you guys just heard from Teresa and her perspective as a worker here in the city of Houston, as a migrant here in the city of Houston, and the impact that it's just had on her. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. Her story, it's obviously the same as many others here in the city of Houston, who've gone through the same thing. And then what are some of the key actions our members and the public can do to make a difference here at the moment?
Sure. Yeah, I love this question. I think one thing that we really emphasize at SEER is how much culture change needs to happen. And, climate change is happening all across the U.S., no matter where you are. We all have lived through these, once in a lifetime climate experiences more than once in our lifetime, or more than once in even the past few years. And so it's really important to share your story and to talk about it, and to see that as a way to really influence the culture. And the good news is that the majority of people, public opinion polls show that most people are worried about global warming, and most people do want to see the president and other elected leaders do more. This is a topic that gets very politicized, but actually most of us agree that this is something we need to take seriously and we need to do more on. There was a poll that the Yale program on climate change did that also showed that 64% of people never talk about global warming with the people in their lives. And so if we're going to get good policy, if we're going to get the right pieces of legislation, if we're going to get implementation and real commitment and real results on the promises that are being made, we have to push for that. The people have to push for that, and the culture has to show that and has to push for that. So that's one thing, is to talk with everyone, share your story, be curious. I think so often when we talk about climate change, we feel like it's something that is really too big and too overwhelming, and it's easy to feel really hopeless. It's also easy to leave it to the quote unquote experts, right? To leave it to the scientists and the engineers and the people who have letters after their names. But you know what? We set public policy, and we set the direction for our future. And so we have to see ourselves as leaders and as experts. The things that we're living through, that's expertise as well. And we need that to really reach the true solutions. The other thing I would say is to make sure that you're tracking all of these conversations at the global and national and local level. I promise you that wherever you are, there is somebody, or there are several somebody's already working on this issue, and they would love to have your hands and your help, and they've got a seat ready for you at that table. And so whether that looks like, getting involved in candidate forums, or, get out the vote efforts, or connecting to electoral education events where people are asking folks who are running for office or who are seeking election, what is your platform? What are you going to do about this problem? And how can I see myself in the solutions that you're offering? So I would encourage you all to really get involved at a local level, and see how that connects to everything that's happening across the country and the world on this topic.
Thank you so much. I couldn't have said that piece better myself. Look, you heard here from someone from Florida who's living in Florida and it's getting impacted. This is a problem that's going everywhere. And then you've also now heard from folks right here in the city of Houston. This is more, a question for that I have here for our friend Nicole. And just seeing sort of what do you think the link here is between places like Florida, places like Houston and California, right, who are the top three, I think, that are getting impact right now by climate change?
Well, I think the states that have some of the largest and fastest growing immigrant communities are Texas, California, and Florida. So I think that's certain commonality that exists between those places. I think when it comes to like Haiti, South Florida, and Texas, those are all in what's called Hurricane Alley. And over the last decade, we've seen storms in that area become much stronger. The 2020 Atlantic hurricane season was officially the most active on record. I think there were like 14 active hurricane storms that were produced in that season. It was also the sixth season in a row with more named storms and hurricanes for 30 years. So this is a trend that, along with heat and sea level rise, is expected to continue. And I think it's important to note that climate change impacts don't happen in a vacuum, like when everything else is in order. They happen when there's political upheaval, or when people are dealing with health issues, or looking for work, or trying to make ends meet. My family and I lost our home during Hurricane Andrew and went through what the struggle of displacement is. So climate change is often called a threat multiplier, and it's especially that for immigrant communities. And that's evident in the experiences everyone has kindly shared today, and is the case for, unfortunately, millions of people in this country and across the globe.
Thank you so much for saying that. Look, here's what I would say. Many times, and I think people, when they hear climate change, you're right, they think, well, I'm not the expert on climate change. I'm not, that doesn't have to deal with me. Or the people who should care about it, the politicians, or people like you, Nicole, or people like you, Iris, right, that are leading the conversation through the organizations that you guys represent and the role that you have. But I would say that climate change really does impact every single one of us in one way or another. And it impacts, when I think about many of the immigrants who are now being moving to other countries, because when in their home countries the climate change has impacted them so much that they can no longer plant their crops. The drought, the water, everything is having an impact for them, and so they're looking for something better for their family. And this is why we're now starting to see people, these huge migrations coming in for something better, a place where they can actually take care of their families. I think here locally in Houston, I would tell you, every time we see a freeze, a flood, or anything that's connected to impact to climate change, we're seeing displacements, homelessness. We're seeing people having to move away, and the impact that I see is that many of them, because of the communities that are getting hit, our working class communities are getting hit in a different way, right? Many of them have 2 or 3 jobs right there where they're close to each other so that they can get to it. And when something like this happens, all of a sudden they get sent somewhere else. We don't have the best transportation system in the city of Houston, and now they can't get to their second job or their third job. And so we see the economic impact in that way. So for many of us who we think we're not impacted, I think if we just pay a little bit more attention, we start to see that we're impacted in a much bigger way than we think. And it's time, like you said, that we get involved now. The time is now. We can't afford to continue to have to move again and uproot our families and uproot ourselves economically. And we have to get active now. You guys just said it. We need to get active in elections. The people who make the decisions about policies around climate change and funding of how we're going to make keep the programs going, or accountability to corporations who are hurting our climate, are the elected officials. And so, it's never too late. We have an election in 2022 coming up. We all work for organizations that have access to many members, and our members have access to their family. And we can have that conversation about the importance of registering to vote, the importance of actually going out to vote, but also to educate ourselves on this issue and how it connects to our day-to-day lives. So I appreciate you guys being here. I think this is the first step in educating our community. We need to have more and more of these types of events and coordinate to make sure that we can get it to the right people, the people who are going to be making decisions on who their elected leaders are, and understand why they should care about it. So thank you, all of you, for the time that you gave us today. And hopefully we'll get to do many more of these events in the future. Thanks.